All right, so I'm going to explain the Building a City project. So Building a City project has going to have three parts. You're going to work on part number one right now, but I'm just going to kind of explain each of the parts for you here, or just like a little overview of each of the parts. So the Building a City project is going to be, you want to imagine that you've been asked to design an entirely new city in an underdeveloped region of a country. So although most cities come from, they build up over time. There are some examples of cities that have really been planned. So, like for example, Washington D.C. is a planned city. It was planned as the capital. Another example of a planned city is Brasilia. Brasilia is the current capital of Brazil. That was kind of more in the center of Brazil as opposed to like Rio or Sao Paulo, which are more on the coast. And Brasilia was a planned city to try to encourage migration to central Brazil. So imagine you've been asked to design a city in an underdeveloped region of your country, and you want to attract people to this region. So this assignment is going to include three parts: some brainstorming questions, a map showing the spatial layout of your city, and then a written description. So today we're just going to work on part one, which is the brainstorming questions. But eventually you're going to be drawing, so physically drawing, either on paper and then taking a picture of it, or using some sort of digital drawing tool, a spatial layout of your city, and then a written description of your city. So when we think about cities and city planning, cities are oftentimes organized into zones, and those different zones have different purposes. So oftentimes we'll have residential zones. A residential zone is where people live. An industrial zone where we'd have our factories and our warehouses, and a commercial zone where we'd have our stores, our restaurants, our shops. So zoning policy in cities can be really complicated. Obviously, we're doing this at a pretty low level, so I'm not asking you to do something like really crazy. I don't know why I can't get signed in right now. Let's try this real quick. But this map here, which I'm not going to be able to get into, sorry. Well, we'll just skip that for now. But anyway, so zoning maps can be really complicated, but generally there's different rules about what is allowed in different zones. So we're going to talk about different zones. The first zone, and you're going to need to have each of these zones in your city. So the central business district of a city is the built-up downtown area. It's generally a commercial center, business center. So this is an example of a kind of built-up area. A commercial zone are going to be zones in the city that people shop, eat, work. It would include office buildings, stores, malls, and restaurants. And you're going to want to go back to these slides as you work through your assignment to just remind yourself what they are. Industrial zone is the area of a city where factories are. This would include the manufacturing, food processing, and transportation. And then residential zones are the areas that most people live. This would include houses, apartment buildings, but also includes schools, places of worship, and parks. So for example, Burnsville High School is actually zoned as a residential area, like where people would reside, where people would live. But because schools are allowed in residential areas, that's why this school is here. And then another example of a zone is a mixed land use zone. So these zones would be combinations of offices, stores, homes. If you have been to the heart of the city area in Burnsville, that is zoned as mixed land use. So you would find shops at the bottom level oftentimes. You'd find maybe apartment buildings, maybe office buildings. So it's a little bit of a mix of use, right? It's a little bit more walkable. So people could be living here, working here, shopping here, and it's a lot more walkable. You're also going to be asked to design your city with one aspect of urban sustainability. And so sustainability is the use of Earth's natural resources, where we're going to be able to use those natural resources into the future. So urban sustainability methods are ways to design cities that work to promote sustainability, and oftentimes they focus on reducing the pollution and reducing the environmental footprint of a city. So things that would be included in sustainability design for sustainable design for cities would be things like walkable neighborhoods. When people are walking, they're not using their cars. But obviously, if we're going to have a walkable neighborhood, we need to have things a little bit closer together. So this is oftentimes going to increase the density of cities. It's going to allow people to walk places and so on and so forth. Another way to decrease pollution and the CO2 emissions caused by cars is to create transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development is when we're going to have public transportation that is connecting different parts of the city. We're also going to, a subway stop, for example, or subway system or our light rail transit, but then building up the stops. So you might have a light rail transit stop that now has bars and restaurants and shops and offices where it's really easy for people to use that public transportation. So we're designing cities in ways that people are going to use public transportation and instead of their cars. And then lastly, we're going to have community gardens and urban farming. So another way to sustain cities is to grow their own food because otherwise food has to come in from all over the place. And anytime you have to transport food a long distance, you're going to be using a vehicle, right? So you're going to be using more CO2. You're also there's also places of cities that just don't have as much access, especially poorer areas don't have as much access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So because of this, having community gardens and urban farming allows more access to better diets and more produce. So today's assignment is going to be part one. And you can ignore the due dates here. So we're going to have, part two will be Monday, part three will be Tuesday. So part one is going to be brainstorming and planning your city. So use this presentation as a guide and reference. It's also linked to your assignment. And then you're also going to ignore the part where you may work with one other person. So I need to erase those things in the slide. But either way, you can take a look at the assignment and let me know if you have any questions.